these guys doing marching through?
We are going to return to the working group. And I believe on our schedule, we have the 95 quarter improvement plan update with Mr. Minnell. There you are in the front row, ready to go. I'm looking for you in the back of the room, so funny. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Secretary and members of the board. I'd like to begin by, providing you with a recap of where we are in the I-95 corridor improvement plan. Today, we're here, of course, but we started back in July with 3 series of public involvement meetings along the corridor, and that started with problem identification. We had information on safety and congestion issues along the corridor that was taken out to the public for feedback. We also provided that information in an update to the board. In October, we followed that with an identification of the potential solutions along the corridor, as well as an operations plan, and that, again, was provided to you and the public along the corridor. And right now, we are looking at developing prioritization of those operations strategies that we developed in October initially. We did intend to go out with a 3rd round of public meetings in November, fully intended to do that, but we ran into a bit of a snag in terms of how we thought we needed to move forward and proceed. We wanted to come back to the board and discuss that with you all and get some feedback and some guidance from you. We still intend on going back out to the public, perhaps early in January, to provide them with an update of where we stand along the corridor in terms of recommendations. But I did want to cover that with you as we move forward through the presentation today. So just a refresher, the Senate Joint Resolution 276, House Joint Resolution 581 did require or request that a study on 95 be conducted between Spotsylvania County and exit 118, that's Thornburg, up to exit 170, which is Springfield Interchange in Fairfax. This board and the Secretary decided to expand the study area. It now runs from North Carolina all the way to the Potomac. And as you all are well aware, 95 is a significant corridor for not only Virginia, but the nation. At one point in time, it was the busiest corridor in the Southeast. It probably still is. It is also very unique in that almost every mode of transportation is represented along the corridor. Significant from a freight perspective, over 9 million trucks per year travel it, and over almost $200 billion worth of goods per year. We previously brought this information back out to you and the public in July. This is one of the performance measures that we focused on, which was person hours of delay along the corridor. I believe this is what Deputy Secretary Donahue referred to as the Space Needle effect, which occurs at the Occoquan. But you can see that there are other issues as well in Northern Virginia and Fredericksburg districts, as well as a few areas in the overlap here in the city of Richmond. We also looked at crash frequency and severity along the corridor, and again, Northern Virginia and Fredericksburg districts have a number of locations in the top 25% for those areas. But within the 95-64 overlap in downtown Richmond, we actually have the highest frequency and severity for crashes along the entire 95 corridor of Virginia. 95 is also interesting in the number of ways that people travel. There's a wide variety of how people travel along the corridor. Particularly in the northern end of the corridor between the Occoquan and Springfield, we have segments that see over 60% of the travel occurring in non-single occupant vehicle, and that's attributable to the phenomenon known as slugging, carpooling, van pools, commuter bus, Virginia Railway Express, and as you travel south along the corridor, you can see that non-SOV portion drops off significantly. As we did in July, we did survey the public in October and asked them to rate the strategies that we were presenting in terms of potential solutions on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. You can see here an example of the Fredericksburg District and Richmond District's responses to that survey. And you can see there's a lot of interest, of course, in mainline capacity improvements, but there is also significant interest in rail and commuter bus service. as well as interchange improvements. And in terms of the potential solutions that we offered, as we did on the I-81 corridor, we did develop a corridor-wide operations upgrade plan, as well as upgrades for parallel facilities such as Route 1 and 301. We did focus on developing significant multimodal recommendations on the corridor, because as you could see from the previous slide, that is incredibly important in the Fredericksburg and Northern Virginia districts. And we did, of course, develop highway capital improvement project recommendations along the 95 main line. The important takeaway here is that this was a data-driven, performance-based approach, and the goal was to provide faster, safer, more reliable travel along the 95 corridor. The one thing that we did not share with you previously in the October meetings, and we did not share this with the public either, is because we had not developed them at the time, was the actual planning level cost estimates that had been developed for the potential recommendations. And as you can see here, they are significant. We had between $1.6 and $2.1 billion worth of improvements identified along the 95 corridor. And this kind of gets to the crux of the matter in terms of why we were not able to move forward in November with public meetings. That $1.6 to $2.1 billion worth of capital improvement projects were 54 projects for highway, rail, commuter bus, park and ride lots, and those did not actually represent every single potential recommendation. There were 35 locations along the corridor that fell within the top 25% for congestion safety issues that we were unable to develop recommendations for. And these were namely where we had interchanges that were in need of potential upgrade. And typically with an interchange, you need to go through some type of study to identify a preferred alternative for that. Those interchanges had not gone through that level of study as of yet, so they were not ripe for analysis. So that we assume that as we move forward with studies in those locations, that $1.6 to $2.1 billion worth of needs will increase as time goes on. So the challenge that we have is that our needs far exceed the available revenues that we have along the corridor. And this is where we wanted to kind of come back and get some guidance from the board today. So let's talk about revenues. As you all are aware, the I-81 Corridor Improvement Program and Fund that was passed by the General Assembly this spring did establish interstate funding for other interstates in Virginia, along with I-81. I-81 gets dedicated funding, 95 gets dedicated funding, I-64 gets dedicated funding, and MVTA gets a chunk of dedicated funding along the corridor. And then there's a miscellaneous pot that can be attributed to any interstate. So roughly $40 million per year by FY 2022 can be allocated to the 95 corridor in Fredericksburg, Richmond, and Hampton Roads districts. About $20 million per year will be going to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority for their allocation to interstates within Northern Virginia, and approximately $44 million per year can go to any interstate in Virginia. In terms of other potential sources of revenue that could be applied to the 95 corridor, there's always Smart Scale. There is regional funding available through MVTA currently. Regional Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, or RSTP, which is available to the MPOs along the corridor that have over 200,000 urbanized population. That's Northern Virginia, Fredericksburg, Richmond, and Tri-Cities MPOs. The Innovative Transportation Technology Fund, I-395 Commuter Choice Program, as well as rail and transit funding programs. So in terms of recommendations and what we would like to actually hear from you all today about, we believe that the operational improvements that we have identified along the corridor offer the highest return on investment and fastest potential for implementation. Those improvements to the freeway mainline operations as well as the parallel facilities total between $60 and $68 million. And will require the first 3 years of available funding dedicated to 95 to implement. We believe that they are ready to proceed with the allocation of that funding to those improvements. However, we also believe that there is need for additional study to be conducted on some specific areas and locations that are in the top 25% for congestion and safety needs. This includes looking at potential bidirectionality of the existing 95 express lanes along the corridor, as well as extending the I-495 express lanes from Springfield Interchange across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, as well as multiple interchange improvements that we had identified as potential additional study locations. I believe Madam Secretary has mentioned previously that she would like the I-64 corridor study to have started yesterday. So we are currently underway and embarking on that study now. We are in the data collection process and we'll be ready to move forward with that in early January. But we believe that since that is only the remaining interstate corridor that is called out and specifically in the legislation as getting dedicated funding, we believe that it would be in our best interest to complete that study prior to moving forward. We also think that we're going to be needing to identify operational improvements for the remaining interstate corridors in Virginia. We believe that there's probably a need for a CTB policy on the allocation of those dedicated interstate revenues. And I believe Mr. Tucker mentioned that in his Smart Scale presentation yesterday, and you, I believe, broached that topic during the October meeting. It's my understanding that Deputy Secretary Donahue is working with the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment to develop some scenarios and options for your consideration in that arena that will probably be shared in a forthcoming meeting.
Not right now.
That was fast.
And,
I appreciate that.
and not right now, in case of those you can see, there's no mic over there. But I do just want to put a really fine point on what Ben is saying. As we started to score the projects in the 95 corridor, there were really three kind of issues we ran into. One, some of these that we think potentially could be the most effective require further study, and we don't have a cost estimate for those or the ability to fully score them because we don't have a truly defined project. So if you look at 95, some of these interchange improvements, particularly at the Occoquan, could have a real benefit by reorienting how the on-ramps actually function, but we have to study that before we can actually score it. And so even just of the universe of 95 projects, some of the things that might actually be the most effective and we might recommend to you up front, we can't do that today because we haven't completed that further study. A broader problem outside of just the 95 corridor is, as Mr. Minnell indicated, the needs are in excess of $1 billion, and the dedicated funds to the corridor are $40 million. And that $40 million is almost $500 million over 10 years. That's real money. But I think if as staff, we think if we're coming to you all as the board to talk about how to allocate the interstate funds, we need to also talk about what we're doing with those discretionary funds. And we don't believe that we can make any recommendations to you or that you have the ability to make the informed decisions without seeing the 64 corridor study to understand how you might want to divide these discretionary funds between the other interstate corridors in the Commonwealth. And then the final issue is, and the commissioners talked about this and I've talked about it and Ben has as well, on all of these interstates, we fundamentally believe that these operation improvements are the fastest things to implement, have the best return on investment, and we need to actually identify what that cost is on the other corridors. We've done it for 81, we've done it now for 95, we're working on 64, but then there's 77, 295, 85, et cetera, and so on, that we also think need to be funded off the top, just as we said we were going to do in the 81 kind of program there. And so with that in mind, we're at a somewhat anticlimactic stage where we don't think we can recommend to you a prioritized list of projects because you have those three variables kind of hanging out there, and we would like to do some of that additional study, advance the 64 plan, and then also develop operational improvements for these other corridors before we give you a recommended list of projects for the 95 corridor, because we think at this stage we're missing some key information that might otherwise be necessary to make an informed set of recommendations to you all for your consideration.
I think the other piece too is that the funding from the interstate revenue is actually phased in.
Correct.
So we actually have very little money to start. So it's phased in, fully implemented in 3 years.
Yes, and those figures Mr. Minnell showed 2 slides before, to the Secretary's point, that's not this year. That's in 3 or 4 years from
Correct.
now. So again, remember, this is a 3-year phase-in that we have with the truck registration fees, the road tax, and then ultimately a diesel tax increase.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Miller?
When might that be?
Madam Chair.
Never heard that question before.
Yes.
When might you expect that to be?
No, I understand. I would expect that to be sometime next year, several months after the end of session.
Next summer.
Yes.
Enough.
And I expect that we will be updating you and refining that estimate as we get further down this course.
Makes a lot of sense.
Mr. Rucker.
When are you planning to update the districts? You've been meeting with folks of this change, because that's not what they're anticipating.
Madam Chair, Mr. Rucker, you are correct. I think there is an anticipation from some of the folks out in the field, partially based on comments we made, and I will recognize that, that they're going to have a prioritized list of projects here on the first day of session. And so I think we're trying to be as direct and upfront that as we undertook that kind of process, we realized that we were missing what we believe to be key information. So we will be going back out and holding additional meetings, either with the MPOs or full-on public meetings in January, to really talk about where things stand, depending on what happens today, obviously, and your kind of advice and consideration there. But we'll be going back out to them and talking with them, and we do want to follow up with the various district members to talk about whether that's something best done at kind of the regional authority MPO level or whether a full-on public meeting is necessary. We stand prepared to do whatever you all as board members in these districts would like to see happen, but I think that's something we want to follow up with you all on.
Mr. Miller.
I want to take this opportunity to look at or make a comment about the changeable message signs. This is sort of anecdotal and you know, across the state, but obviously I spend more time at Hampton Roads and other places. I trust Waze better than I trust the message signs. And I will tell you that over the course of a number of years, I've come to do that. And I don't understand that given all the cameras we have, and I've seen the operations center, which is impressive, and there's lots of people, lots of cameras, lots of data. But I turn to my phone a lot more frequently than I trust those signs, and I find out that it's better to trust my phone, and I don't like that. So I don't know if that's other people's experience or what people think about that, but many, many, many times, and Chris is here, I know, hate to pick on you, but you're in my district, or the district I live in, I should say. I'm not really looking for an answer or response, but you know, I'd like somebody maybe offline to give me some help with that.
Madam Secretary, what I'd say is, Mr. Miller, absolutely, that's what I was about to offer, was that credibility of the message is extremely important to the agency and creating operations as a core function. So I'd like to understand the issues that you're experiencing to be able to, one, if there's a credibility issue, regain that credibility, especially not only in Hampton Roads, but elsewhere throughout the Commonwealth.
And I think it would also be helpful to explain, you know, what our partnership is with Waze. And as Deputy Commissioner yesterday was saying to us, a lot of our information actually feeding Waze. So we do have a partnership with them. So I think that might be a really good update.
Right. So in talking about the recommended operational and parallel facilities improvements, I did want to give you an idea of the due diligence that we went through to kind of narrow down and focus on which strategies and countermeasures we thought would best respond to the underlying issues along the 95 corridor. Again, we focused on the top 25% locations for incident-related delay along the 95 main line. We looked at both freeway and parallel arterial improvements. We started off with over $200 million worth of operational and parallel facilities improvements initially. We've gone through an effort to do a return on investment analysis for each one of those measures and strategies to identify the ones that have the highest ROI. We've ended up at $60 to $68 million worth of freeway and arterial operations investments. This is just a partial list of the operational improvements that we did identify initially. Some of these were also included in the Interstate 81 corridor plan, but we also have added some additional ones that are specific to the 95 corridor, particularly with the notion that we have extremely high traffic volumes and saturation in the northern end of the corridor. So we also shared this information with you previously about parallel facilities improvements, and where we're looking at where we have an incident that blocks a lane on the main line. Traffic flows like water, so we are looking at how the parallel facilities can be upgraded to facilitate the traffic flow around where we have an incident in the main line. We actually went in and used information that was available that was Virginia specific. We talked with our operations division as well as used research from VTRC to identify the actual specific benefits that we have seen from some of these programs. Towing program information and Safety Service Patrol information is based on Virginia specific studies that have been conducted. The variable speed limit information is being provided by Federal Highway Administration studies that have been done at the national level, and we're using ramp metering information from Minnesota DOT and their experience in implementing ramp metering within the interstate system in their Twin Cities area. So in terms of an example ROI analysis that was conducted, we looked at safety service patrols and we looked at nationally, average percent reduction of secondary crashes when safety service patrols are on site is about 40%. That's coming from Federal Highways Administration. 20% of those crashes are secondary crashes, so we are looking at crashes along 95 and identifying where they're occurring and actually implementing those crash numbers and calculating the ROI. And you can see that we looked at mobility, safety, energy, and environment for each one of these countermeasures. Some of the measures that we looked at specifically were incident delay, percent reduction in incident delay, travel time savings, looking at the crash type, looking at travel time savings as well as fuel consumption and emissions benefits. What we did on each one of these is actually used traffic volumes that we have along the corridor as well as crash data specific to those segments and conducted this evaluation. And you can see for the Safety Service Patrol return on investment, from a capital cost, initial startup cost of $3.3 to $3.6 million, and an O&M cost over a 10-year period, we've calculated a benefit of about $80.1 million. That gives us an ROI of 3.1. And when we looked across all the potential strategies and countermeasures from an operational standpoint, each one of them had at least an ROI of 1. Except geofenced emergency notifications had a 1.3 ROI. Every other ROI was above 3 for these improvements. So we feel pretty strongly about being able to move forward with these recommendations and seeing some potential benefits. In terms of next steps, we would like to come back to the board in January and ask for your approval on the corridor-wide operations and arterial upgrades that we are recommending. We are going to begin work on a 95 executive summary report to be provided to you at that meeting as well. And the final report we would like to get out to this board and the General Assembly by 2020. Again, we're going to anticipate going back out in early January to meet with either the regional bodies or in actual public meetings to provide them with an update on our progress on the 95 corridor. And we'd like to go ahead and start prioritizing the remaining projects after completion of the 64 corridor plan. And that would be the actual capital improvement projects along the highway as well as the transit and rail recommendations. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Ben, the only thing I would say is that the meetings in the districts need to happen before it comes back to the CTV.
Understood.
You know, just to get their input. And I think Mr. Whitworth made some really good points yesterday, and then Mr. Rucker, so we want to make sure we get that input before we come back to the board. Mr. Miller, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was kind of, we talked about not talking about discretionary money because we don't have the big picture. So I presume this only has to do with the sort of non-discretionary money piece of that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would the ROI analysis, could that change if there was more money versus less money? Did you look at all potential projects to get your ROI analysis? Or did you look at projects that you could fund with your non-discretionary money to get your ROI analysis?
No, we looked at all potential projects. As I stated, we initially started out with over $200 million worth of operational and parallel facility upgrades. And knowing that we did have a revenue issue. We did proceed to work through and conduct the ROI analysis on those strategies that had the highest return on investment.
So
along the 95
your
corridor.
your top line that you stopped at was 200 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so you have 40, you've got, I can't remember the numbers, but it was,
60 to 68 million for the freeway and parallel arterials.
I guess I'm just, I always want to know that if there was something that was 250 million, that was really like a huge ROI, and because we stopped at 200 million, we missed it.
It was not an arbitrary number that was assigned for us to stop, or a ceiling that we stopped at. We
All right,
just
thank
worked
you.
for it.
Mr. Smoot, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Secretary. Ben, one question, if I may. I didn't see anything in your presentation that acknowledged that driver behavior often during incidents is directed by Waze or other websites that can lead one off on very dangerous or congested alternatives to avoid the incident. Is there anything we can do about that to give drivers better information than what they're getting on Waze or Google or whatever?
Yesterday, we do have a partnership with Google and Waze that we can work with them on and sharing information. And I am aware that Waze has some history, particularly in Northern Virginia. I believe there's an article in our Eclipse this morning about concerns that are being shared in the Northern Virginia area about how Waze is directing traffic.
Yeah, they just announced recently, a new feature about weather navigation.
Yes, sir. I believe there are opportunities for us to work with Google and Waze to share that information.
Commissioner.
Madam Secretary, Mr. Smoot, this is an ongoing conversation that we're continuing to have with the providers of travel information, Waze, Google, and others. There is a sensation that, well, I'll just say that this is an ongoing conversation. There's more to be had on it. We share some of the same concerns, localities, and Virginia is not the only state or locality that has these same concerns that we're voicing back to those providers.
Thank you.
Mr. Rucker.
I would reemphasize that work with Waze and Google is very important to communities. I live in a community that comes to a standstill when 95 shuts down. I mean, local streets. We worry about the safety of kids who lose their ability to cross the street to get to playgrounds. The community stops. So any work that can be done to ease those issues for communities, not just Fredericksburg, Port Royal, there are lots of communities where 301 goes through. We are all seeing that. One of the things that's also important when it comes to the recommended operational parallel facilities is looking at the safety impact of the communities when these changes happen. When these accidents occur on the major roadways, what fallout happens in these communities. Again, safety is very important, and we don't want to see, again, additional issues coming forward as a consequence of these changes.
I don't want to, I know Kathy McGee's in the back of the room. And so, I just mentioned as this conversation is taking place, as we're working on apps in Northern Virginia, incorporating some of this information, particularly for the safety reasons. Accessibility one, safety being the other. So I just saw you back there, and I just thought it was a good piece of information to include in what you're doing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Mitchell, anything that you'd like to add from the Rail Committee?
Just a couple updates on ridership on a few of our routes. First on the Virginia Breeze, which again is our intercity bus service. We had a great month in October. We had a 28% increase over the October of last year for our intercity bus service. Again, we are in the process of putting together two new routes. One of those, which we hope should say we hope to begin those in the spring. One of those will be from Danville to Washington, D.C., and will travel along 29 and 66. It'll connect Lynchburg, Charlottesville, and Dulles Airport to D.C. as well, and also a new route between Martinsville and Richmond, which will stop in Danville, South Boston, near Hampton, Sydney, and Farmville as well to Richmond. So we're getting those routes started, and again, hope to be launching those early in the spring of next year. On our inner-city bus service, we had, October was our highest ridership month of ever. We it was a 30% increase over October of the previous year. And you may recall that we did do a promotion for 10 days at the beginning of October, which we had about 15,000 people use that promotion, which was great. So, but all of our routes were up. Our Newport News, Richmond, and Norfolk service, which was reconfigured and optimized last year, has been up 20% over between March and October compared to the previous year too. So we've had some really good record ridership on our inner-city bus service, and hope to keep seeing that continue. So that's all I've got.
Oh, at some point, Mr. Malden, Mr. Miller, Mr. Johnson, it might be interesting for those in Hampton Roads to see the 66 study on multimodal transportation, just to see how a study could be done in a multimodal. They don't have Metro, but they have nearly everything else that could be available, and particularly because the demand is going up in Hampton Roads. So anyway, just mention that. Yeah.
Maybe we can have a 300-mile maglev. Mile per hour maglev.
And we're taking contributions. Mr. Williams.
Just a question, Mr. President. Have we ever surveyed the folks that are using the Virginia Breeze service to see who they are? Is it a mobility issue, or is it?
It's a little bit of both in the existing corridor that we have. You know, there are some college students, but actually a lot of them are actually not college students as well. They're just people that are looking for additional options and connections in the 81 corridor. So that has been, again, a really, really popular service. And I think it also demonstrates the, you know, need for those kind of solutions, particularly on the 81 corridor.
It'd be a good thing to get a handle on in terms of who's doing it, so you would know utilization. You could kind of target the next projects where that population of people are that are the main users.
Definitely, the goals of the service are really to connect areas that don't have other inner-city options to the rest of the network. So that's was the big reason we've really come up with the two new routes that we have, both connecting Martinsville to Richmond, and then also the route that'll be connecting the Danville area up to DC. So.
And also just the bus service that we use to connect to the Roanoke train.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
all of that, trying to make those connections is really important everywhere in Virginia.
Need that bus to get to that casino in Danville.
There, yeah. But really good idea to know who the ridership, what that is as we, you know, expand this. So, I should have said Rail and Transit Committee. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, so it's okay.
Yeah, subcommittee.
Yeah.
Commissioner?
I just have a few items that are in your package today, one of which you'll find the initial financial plan associated with the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel Expansion Project. That will be submitted to FHWA. It is, albeit a little bit late, we've been tinkering with the language in it. I would expect an update here fairly soon, since it's been about a year old of the document. Also in your package is the special structures report. You'll hear for the action report or action agenda item taking action on that. Certainly that was emailed out to the committee in advance. And then the final item was an executed agreement with the U.S. Geological Survey on some data sharing that's just required as part of my update. That is also in your pamphlet. So beyond that, no further updates.
Sounds great. Just really want to thank Carol again for organizing the logistics of the meeting and dinner last night. And Brenda, you always do such a great job, and we appreciate that. Thank you so much. The work on all of our studies and reports continues as the General Assembly approaches. The work on the sustainability issue, the work group will be finalizing findings this month. There have been no decisions made and no recommendations made to this point, so we're still working on that. But I will bring those back to you. And other than that, again, yesterday, I think we pointed out that we have a lot of work continuing with V-Trans and Smart Scale, but just really good, thoughtful work, and I really thank all of you for the contributions you give to that process. Before we conclude, the environmental group, the task force we put together, any news you'd like to report to us?
We had an exciting meeting this morning. VDOT presented just a wide range of initiatives that they're engaged in that they have really meaningful impact in the day-to-day. And I think at some point it'd be appropriate, and I believe next month we may have an environmental presentation from Ms. Deem that I believe the whole board should share in. So not only did we learn some new things today, I think Mr. Johnson and I are moving towards consolidating our thoughts on the direction our subcommittee may take. And of course, it would include discussion of the NEPA process and what our climate policy should be in regard to NEPA. So very productive.
Okay, Mr. Johnson?
It was an excellent meeting. I thank Angel for her commentary, and she brought her executive team, and they were all involved in the interactive discussion about the critical mass issues. So thank you all for coming.
Excellent. Thank you, Angel. Kathy McGee, anything from Innovation and Technology?
Thank you. I want to first say we have looked at basalt. Mr. Miller asked yesterday during our presentation, we have looked at basalt, reinforced polymer for rebar. Apparently it's very similar to glass, and we continue to look at that as an option for corrosion-resistant materials. So there you go. We did have a really good meeting yesterday of the Innovation Subcommittee. Hari Shripathy from VDOT's Office of Strategic Innovations gave an update on the work that they're doing to try to bring innovations from the bottom up in the organization and work to create the culture of innovation throughout the agency, and I think everyone really appreciated that conversation. As a result of that, I did commit to asking the ports and aviation. We already hear from DRPT on a regular basis about the work they're doing, but to get the other agencies to come and talk about the innovations that they have going on within their own agencies so that we can look for points of leverage to work together to make everything work better. I did share a few things with the committee that I see happening in the news with respect to innovation, and the biggest one is the renewed conversation about federal legislation for AVs, automated vehicles, and what that might mean. In Virginia, we have not created any regulations around testing and deployment of AVs, and so anything that happens at the federal level would obviously impact us. But the concern is without leadership from the federal level, we'll end up with a patchwork of regulations across the country, which will make deployment even slower than it seems to be today. The other issue that I see happening at the federal level is a push to once again reduce the availability of the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum for transportation. There's a proposal on the table to reduce the 75 megahertz band down to 30, to take 40 and make it available for unlicensed use, and leave us with, or take 45 and leave us with 30. 20 of which might be dedicated to 5G, leaving the other 10 for DSRC. So we're concerned about that. We're following that at the federal level, and I will keep you posted on what happens there. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. Any questions?
Mr. Kaskowitz?
Well, it's kind of a related question. Mr. Johnson and I have determined that we're going to hold our environmental meetings on Wednesday morning before the action item agenda meeting. And so with that, I've requested I be maintained on the on the Innovation Task Force or
Great.
Subcommittee.
So thank
We
you for
didn't
doing
let him go to begin with, so we're happy.
There you go. And Mr. Malvin, anything to report on your work with our chief engineer and on the bidding process and trying to?
I would say that we're in the data collection mode. The team is doing a really good job in terms of taking historical data and what experiences we've had, looking at some short-term trends and some concerns. We're looking at interviewing some potential consultants to do an in-depth look at our processes. We are looking at best practices around the country and identifying some areas that we need to look at closer. So to answer your question, we're working, just collecting data and understanding where some soft spots are and what we could do to kind of enhance the process. I would say that it would be April or May that we would like to come back and present to you what we're seeing, some possible improvements that we think we could implement.
Excellent. Thank you. Anything else from the board? Okay. We will adjourn the workshop and we will move into the action meeting. This morning, I believe we have 2 people signed up for public comment. Tim Hall from Martinsville. Mr. Hall, typically we ask during public comment that you try to limit your remarks to about 3 minutes, and we really thank you for coming.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I was here yesterday and got a greater appreciation of your task. It is very difficult, and we thank you for that. I'm here as the Henry County Administrator. You say Martinsville, we prefer Henry County, but we won't quibble. I'm here to talk about the Martinsville Southern Connector. And I want to perhaps remind the board and staff that this is not necessarily just a Henry County initiative. This is a regional initiative. And we have supporting letters from the city of Martinsville, Roanoke County, Roanoke City, Franklin County. This route would enable each of those localities to benefit. So it's not just us that we're asking for some consideration. One of the questions raised yesterday was the impact of economic development. There is a significant impact on economic development. Just adjacent to where this road would go, Henry County has invested nearly $40 million into a business park. We have our first client there, Press Glass, a company from Poland. We are soliciting other clients as we speak. There are 3 such parks within this area that would benefit from this road. Henry County clearly, but also Franklin County with its business park, which is new, and just slightly to the east in Pittsylvania County, Danville, they have one as well. We are not what we used to be. We went months in double-digit unemployment. We are no longer there. Our newest unemployment number is 2.9%. Not quite the Commonwealth rate, but better than the U.S. rate. We need help literally getting over the hump from here on. Route 220 south, particularly the southbound lanes, look like if you have a dog that runs down the aisle of your home and messes up the rug, you know what those humps look like? That's what 220 looks like. It also goes left and right that way, which makes it very difficult. And I chuckle when I hear sometimes that Richmond is referred to as Central Virginia. There's a whole lot more west of Richmond than perhaps some people think.
Mr. Hall, I'm from Lynchburg.
I understand.
And so
Yes, ma'am.
we're Central Virginia.
Preaching to the choir, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. I'm with you on that.
Another issue brought up yesterday was safety concerns. And it's hard to see on Google Maps because you're looking at it literally from the sky. But there are humps, there are left and right turns. Martinsville Speedway is in Henry County, but that's not the only place you see some significant side-by-side racing. You see it on 220 as well. And finally, there was some reference yesterday, and I certainly appreciate the concern about false hope for our citizens. If you live in Southside or Southwest, we know all about harsh realities. We're like salmon. We're swimming upstream every day. What we need is some help. We are a long way, literally and figuratively, from Richmond and from Washington, but don't forget about us. Our Board of Supervisors averages more than 10 years in office. Our West Piedmont Planning District Commission has endorsed this project. The Martinsville-Henry County Chamber of Commerce, which represents the business community, has endorsed this project. We know our citizens, we know our residents, we know our business clients. All we ask is that you give us an opportunity. That's all we're asking for, is an opportunity. And we ask fervently that you help continue this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you so much for coming and spending. I didn't realize you were there yesterday. I would have introduced my. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. And I do really appreciate the debate and discussion that we had on this issue yesterday. I know that Mr. Smoot's going to continue working because we want to make sure that whatever decision is made on this board, we all make it with the best information that we have. And that's what's really important, and that's why it's important that you're here to speak to us as well. Let's see, we have Ray Sipe. Thank you for coming. Is there anyone you need to join you?
Sorry?
Anybody you need to join you?
Yeah. Madam Secretary, members of the board, last week at the, I'm Ray Sipe with the American Concrete Pavement Association, and last week at our national meeting in New Orleans, we presented the Virginia Department of Transportation a Longtime Pavement Recognition Award. And it was given in recognition for Route 316 over in Accomack County. With only minimum maintenance, the State Route 316, Greenbush Road, has served the communities of Accomack County for about 8 decades. And I have the award here that I got from Mike Davis over in Hampton Roads, who was down in New Orleans to accept the award. And we greatly appreciate that. Certainly appreciate all the guys from the Materials Division down in the district and the residency that kind of put this together for us. And if with your permission, I'll pass it along.
Yes, and Chris Hall is here as well.
Ah,
Thank you very
yes,
much.
sir.
Appreciate it.
It's
It's our
yours.
honor to accept this award.
Chris wants to take it back with him to Hampton Road, so you all have to arm wrestle over it, or
I
we
don't
can
know,
get
you might
one.
have Mr. Johnson arm wrestling for this as well. So,
That's your decision. You can take it where you'd like to take it. I recognize that back 80 years ago, this was a significant addition to the eastern shore of Virginia. And it was the main spline, if you will, going north to south that so many people rode on for so many years. There's a similar road in northern Virginia, in northern New Jersey, that goes from the 2 tunnels to Suffern, New York at about the same time. Pretty much the first such concrete roads in the United States. So to consider that the Eastern Shore, and specifically Accomack County, had a cement road at all, up from horse and buggies, needless to say, it's significant. So thank you for the recognition and the award.
Bless you, sir. Thank you. Y'all have a Merry Christmas.
yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And Chris, thank you for being here. Is there any words that you'd like to say since you're here with the Academy?
Just honored to accept the award, and it's just great to. We obviously still have a lot of concrete in Hampton Roads, so working with our concrete contractor is very important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sipe, for doing that. That was really wonderful. Is that it? That's all that's signed up for this morning. We're always happy to welcome anyone to speak. Okay. With that, do I have a motion on the minutes?
Moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Mr. Mann. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have an action item for your consideration this morning that will bring several streets in the city of Richmond into the state highway primary system that was directed by the General Assembly in the 2019 Appropriations Act. The streets in the resolution are adjacent to Capitol Square and ultimately are to be controlled by Department of General Services and Division of Capitol Police. Specifically, those streets are Bank Street between 9th and 14th, and the portions of 10th, 12th, and Governor Streets between Bank Street and Main Street. VDOT has coordinated with DGS, and DGS has agreed to be responsible for all asset maintenance of the added streets, with the exception of snow removal on the roadway. And VDOT will continue to handle snow removal on the roadway for these streets. The resolution before you will add the noted streets to the state highway primary system, and we recommend approval.
So move as long as the state's going to pay for it.
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you, Mr. Mann. Joanne Maxwell. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. I am here to ask for the board's final action on the second set of regulatory reviews. In October, we presented those reviews to you all. There are, I think it's 7 regulations that we are looking at. For the most part, the actions in the resolution, or in the resolution that you have, are consistent with what we discussed in the prior meetings. We've modified the recommendations on 2 of the resolutions that seem to gather some interest from various board members. Basically, for the regulation dealing with roadway and structure lighting, as well as the regulation dealing with restriction of through traffic in residential areas, we're still recommending a repeal of those regulations, but then at the same time, retention of the underlying policies. And then the board is instructing VDOT to come back and make recommendations with regard to those policies, to update those policies and or make requisite changes that the board seems to be appropriate. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're asking for the board to do today, is to approve the recommendations that are in the resolution, and then we will be coming back to you all on those 2 specific policies that are highlighted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will move approval. And before I get the second, just take the opportunity to thank Ms. Maxwell for all the work we did together. These 2 policies that we're asking to come back by July, the end of June, early July, date from the mid-90s, and they haven't really been looked at since. And it's time. I was thinking about this cut-through one as we were having the Waze conversation. You know, we just need to really update these and get them to work better for us and moving forward. So happy to move approval, and thanks to Joanne.
Second.
Any further discussion? I thank you both. I thank you, Ms. Hines and Joanne, and your entire team for getting this done. It's a huge effort, and for those of us on the board, we really appreciate it. So, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Pryor. Good morning.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have 2 items for your consideration today. The first is the amendment of 2 projects to the 6-year improvement program. One is completely funded by Loudoun County. The second project is a safety improvement on I-81 in Botetourt County, funded with surplus funds from a nearby I-81 project. And I recommend your approval.
Move approval.
A second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you. And the second item is my normal monthly transfers. I recommend your approval.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pryor. Mr. Heltzel. Good morning.
I'm a proxy. Madam Secretary, members of the board, my business item is the location approval of the Route 670 Connector Road in Greene County. Public hearing was held for the project. An environmental review was done by department staff since it's state-funded only. The recommended location alternative was endorsed by the Greene County Board of Supervisors and reviewed by department staff. And the chief engineer is recommending it to you all for your consideration. And I ask on behalf of my colleagues for your approval.
Make a motion for approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Vlasic. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you. Secretary Valentine, Commissioner, and CDB board members, I have 2 decision briefings before you today. Decision briefing number 1 is from the Tazewell County Board of Supervisors, Bristol District. Approval of the Commonwealth Transportation Board is sought by Tazewell County Board of Supervisors for the naming of State Route 16, Stony Ridge Road over Horsepence Creek in Tazewell County as the Willie Rogers Griffith Memorial Bridge. Tazewell County wishes to honor the life and sacrifice of Special First Class Willie Roger Griffith. Mr. Griffith was a member of Special 4B Company, 2nd Battalion, 502nd Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. On May 18, 1967, while on a search and destroy mission in Vietnam, Specialist 4th Class Willie Roger Griffith was killed in action while charging through enemy fire. Specialist 4th Class Willie Roger Griffith received the Vietnam Military Medal of Merit and the Military Medal of the Oak Leaf Cluster. He also was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor, a Bronze Star with an Oak Leaf Cluster, and a Purple Heart by the U.S. government. He is memorialized on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. VDOT supports this request.
Ms. Riea. All those in favor, please rise. Thank you.
Thank you. Decision briefing number 2 is from the Page County Board of Supervisors, Staunton District. Approval of the Commonwealth Transportation Board is sought by the Page County Board of Supervisors for the commemorative naming of the bridge on Route 675, Big Sills Ferry Road, over the South Fork of the Shenandoah River, Page County, as the Sedgwick Memorial Bridge. The Page County Board of Supervisors wishes to honor and memorialize the lives, services, and sacrifices of the Sedgwick family. Elmer N. Sedgwick, Richard P. Sedgwick, Julian R. Sedgwick, and James G. Sedgwick are 4 brothers who served in the various branches of the United States Armed Services. Elmer Sedgwick was the recipient of the Silver Star and Purple Heart medals. He was killed in action at the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. In 1969, Richard Sedgwick donated soil for footers at the western end of this bridge, and he also donated land adjacent to the bridge. Richard and Ann Sedgwick Family Trust contributed to the VDOT road improvement projects on Serenity Ridge Road near this bridge. VDOT supports this request.
Mr. Whitworth.
Madam Chairman, I make this motion. This is very appropriate, I think, to honor this entire family that has been so involved in our nation and also in support of Page County through the years.
All those in, oh, I'm sorry.
Second.
All those in favor, please rise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hall, welcome back. That was just practice for this.
Madam Secretary, members of the board, I have one action item for your consideration to request your approval to delegate authority to the Commissioner to terminate a standard project agreement between VDOT and the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission for the Route 460 5813 Connector Study project termination. On November 2016, the Commissioner executed a standard project agreement between VDOT and HR TAC for funding and administration of the Route 460 5813 Connector Study. HR TAC provided $5 million in funding for this study. Since then, VDOT, in conjunction with HRTPO and local stakeholders, has executed and performed traffic analysis of this connector study area, and was concluded that the existing facilities will accommodate traffic demands up through the year 2040, and no further study on congestion relief is required at this time. The department will continue to pursue safety improvements with local stakeholders to this corridor, but as HR TAC funds are only eligible to be used for congestion relief. Accordingly, VDOT needs to release the HR TAC funds remaining on the project through amendment and termination totaling $3.9 million. We seek your approval to execute the amendment and termination document.
Make a motion, we approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Madam Chairman? Yesterday, not to do with this, but have to do with congestion. Yesterday, I just wanted to go on record. Yesterday, we talked a lot about the scoring system and land use versus congestion. So here's a classic example. All this money in Hampton Roads that we're raising is all about congestion. right? And to Scott's point yesterday and others' points, so we're talking about changing our scoring and doing something with land use that would make it less important and would increase congestion in many of our views. And that just seems counterintuitive to what the regions with heavy congestion are trying to deal with. So I didn't say anything yesterday. Scott and I have talked about it a bunch. I just want to go on record as including my thoughts in that regard, and that I would be concerned that we're creating exactly what we're spending lots of money to get out of. And it's not a great legacy. Now, having said that, how do you balance all that out? That's harder to do. But I think land use is critically important as we go forward, not only to the point of safety, but more directly to the point of congestion and how we're spending billions of dollars to get out of that. And let's not create more of it.
So you're agreeing with?
I'm agreeing with him.
I couldn't quite tell.
I'm sorry. Let me be very clear.
Okay, yes,
I'm
I just want to make
concerned.
sure.
I'm concerned that we would reduce the score of land use or the weight of land use, because the effect will not only be congestion, but would also, to his point, a little bit perhaps less directly and less intuitive to safety as well, and to Mary's point. So I'm going on record as being in that camp. Thank you.
I would just like to point out that if he didn't speak on that yesterday, it's the only thing he didn't speak on. Just saying.
Mr. Rucker, can I say how great it is to have you on the board?
Madam Secretary.
Mr. Dodson.
I second that.
Mr. Rucker, I also have a hearty laugh. And when my children were young and in plays and different things, I used to be asked by certain teachers and directors, could I please be in the audience that night? But anyway, appreciate that very much.
I still get that from the students in my university. So.
Mr. Miller, I will just say that prior to you coming back to the board, discussion about the factors and how they should be weighted was a huge part of what we did. Mr. Donahue stood at that podium for days. And I really do think, and I can remember the discussion on congestion in land use. And as we were, yes, trying to address congestion, land use was trying to prevent the congestion of the future. And so that was where I think a lot of the discussion kind of landed. And so anyway, it was really good to see it expanded yesterday through the remarks. So thank you very much. We appreciate that comment. Absolutely. Very much. Yes.
I thank you as well, Mr.
Yes. Okay. Commissioner.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board.
Morning.
I have one action item for your consideration today, and that's the approval of the comprehensive review for the related or comprehensive review report related to the Robert O. Norris Bridge and statewide special structures fund and asset condition performance targets. As you know, the 2019 Acts of the General Assembly requested a comprehensive review of our current and future performance targets for our pavements and bridges. Specifically, that legislation requested the department to undertake a study to consider the investment strategies associated with our Highway Maintenance and Operations Fund, our State of Good Repair program, recommend new performance targets to create a sustainable performance for our pavements and bridges, looking at it from a 20-year timeline, investigate the investment strategy associated with our HMO and State of Good Repair for those performance targets, and including a plan to address our special structures. I've been before the board in May of this year, as well in September, October, and November. I'm sure we've had a number of presentations on this subject. So what we're asking the board to take action on today are five points. One is incorporate the edits, or allowing myself and my staff to incorporate any edits to finalize the document. The second action item is requesting the secretary then to take all appropriate actions to finalize that document and present that to the General Assembly. The third action item is to approve our proposed performance targets that we've presented to you over the last several months, and then support VDOT's initiatives to create a health index to be able to help us identify and prioritize that plan of improvement for special structures on an annual basis. And then finally, requiring the Commissioner of Highways to come back before you on an annual basis to present to you how our performance is in actual terms versus what we have presented in plan terms. So that's our annual report card. With that being said, I recommend your approval on this action item.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That was 2 years of very hard work.
Excellent work.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine everything that went into this, and anyway, congratulations to you. That was a lot. Mr. Donahue. Ms. Ray.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. Here today to an action item for your consideration, requesting your approval of the Highway Safety Improvement Program project prioritization process. This has been the culmination of work that's been conducted over the last year that started in a better data-driven process for establishing our targets and being able to identify those strategic investments that are necessary to improve our safety outcomes. We also put this information out for public comment. We did receive limited feedback. More than half the comments we received were positive and in support of the new policy. The other ones that had some feedback for still had some concerns about the limited funding availability for spot improvement projects. And I think that we've all discussed that concern and have established a process for which, if there's a dire need and a project meets thresholds, the commissioner may propose that project to you for your consideration. And also some concern about the types of things that would be approved as a systemic treatment for localities to utilize. We do anticipate guidance being developed. Funding is not available to localities until 24 and 25, those fiscal years. So we will continue to develop some guidance to help establish the rules around that. We also have an annual reporting requirement to report back on you with the progress that we've made. With that, we request your approval.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Again, many, many months of work went into this, and I really thank you, and I thank Mr. Whitworth and members of the board who made this even better. So thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Mr. Vlasic. Good morning again.
Secretary Valentine, Commissioner, CDB board members.
Oh,
I have
sorry.
one action item for you for a bid recommendation. The Woodrow Wilson Bridge, the contract to maintain and operate the bridge will expire in April of 2020. VDOT went out soliciting contractors to replace this contract. We had 3 responsive bidders. Out of the 3, 1 was in excess of the engineering estimate, 2 or below. We went into contract negotiations with the 2 lowest bidders, and after completing negotiations, we are making the recommendation to award to DBI Services the contract. This contract is for initial 5-year period, and then 2 options of 3-year periods for a total of 11 years. And the cost of this contract will be borne equally between Maryland and Virginia, the cost of that contract. Yes.
Were they the low bidders to begin with? The
The-
lower of the 2?
They were not the lowest.
Okay.
They were 2 of the lowest, yeah. They were the second lowest, but they met the standard that we requested. Yes.
Have a motion?
Motion.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Donahue, I think I skipped over 81. Do you have that?
There's the, you like that. Yeah, when that happens.
Madam Chair, members of the board, it's my pleasure to be with you here this morning. As you all know, and we talked about at the last meeting, there are going to be annual reports regarding I-81, the program, and the fund. We went through that initial report. As we talked about, we'll be looking at the conditions and performance of the 81 corridor, as well as the impact of the projects included in the I-81 corridor plan and program and their effect on the conditions and performance of the 81 corridor. As we talked about, this initial report, because we have just started to implement the projects, is kind of using data from last year. It's really our baseline report. Moving forward, I suspect there will be some additional meat where we'll be able to really evaluate the effectiveness of these projects. But again, this is a report of the board, and we'd ask for your approval so that we can submit it to the General Assembly as required by law.
Move.
Second.
One question, Madam Chair. Any chance dollar values would be hooked to those things, to those projects? Have we seen that before?
Madam Chair, she said again, I couldn't hear you.
Excuse me, dollar values attached to those work items in the report, the 81 report.
I can certainly, if there's indulgence from the board, I think we can put that in there if that's not currently included. We do have costs associated with each of those activities.
I thought I'd seen that before somewhere, but I was looking for it in here and didn't see it. So, it's good.
Okay, we can just make sure.
He's in the appendix.
The appendix.
It is? God, I thought
my recollection was that it was in there, but I don't have a copy.
I thought I looked for it all. I'm sorry.
Well, here's Ms.
Apologize.
Day.
Will you help Mr. Williams with his
It's attached to the
homework?
resolution in the appendix of the report, so if you look in it, it's referenced in there.
Okay.
You've seen it before.
Comes around, goes around.
Secretary, just for clarification, are we at this, by taking this vote today, are we agreeing to the bonding program?
Madam Chair, Ms. Hines, what you are doing is recommending to the General Assembly that you believe a bonding program would be the advantageous manner to move forward with this. As Mr. Williams has noted at previous meetings, the General Assembly would have to authorize this debt. This debt would not impact the overall debt capacity of the Commonwealth, as it would be backed by a regional 2.1% fuels tax, and I apologize for not making that clear. That's also included in the resolution up front.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Any new business? I will just close that. I barely know what day it is, what month it is. Here we are at the end of 2019. Amy White tries to keep track of all the work and accomplishments that take place in transportation in the Commonwealth. It is a mighty task at times, but none of that would happen without the people around this table. And I thank you again. I wish you all the happiest of holidays. And I look forward to seeing you maybe once again in FY19, but certainly when we get back in 2020. So Merry, Merry, and Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.
Train to